Good morning if you're in in Europe, and good night if you're not. I guess for the rest of the world. So my name's Craig Smith from the Big Picture People. Welcome to this, which is our first proper live stream. So we've done one before, but that was just me doing a monologue. But this is our first proper live stream with our guest, who I'll introduce properly in a minute. But good morning, Richard. How are you?
Good morning. I'm brilliant. Thank you, Craig.
Excellent. Fantastic. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest, who's Richard Nugent. So Richard is the co-founder and managing director of 21 Leadership. And over the last 15 years, Richard has been working with some of the biggest and best known organizations in the world. He helps organizations build their capability and capacity for change, and his clients have executive teams and typically are FTSE top 250 type businesses who are growing and changing their strategic direction. Richard's research and experience has led him to create unique and practical approaches to organizational and cultural change, and he is particularly passionate about challenging clients to align their strategy, culture and brand. Is that all fairly accurate, Richard? Happy with that?
No, brilliant. Yeah, exactly.
You're
Very reflective of the last couple of years, actually. Very.
Oh yeah, definitely, and we'll be delving into that in the conversation. First of all, where are you? I know you're not a million. I know we're streaming all over the world, but you're probably closer to most of the guests who I speak to on my podcast. Whereabouts are you at the minute, Richard?
So I am in our office, which is in Whitley Bay. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Whitley Bay is 9 miles east from Newcastle in the northeast of England. So
exactly,
yeah,
and I'm in Newcastle.
Cold morning in the northeast.
Lovely, yeah, by the North Sea. Yeah. Fantastic. So anyway, Richard, I've done my kind of formal introduction there. Tell us a little bit more about what floats your boat. What are you into? Why do you do what you do? Because I know you're a very purpose-driven person, having known you for a number of years.
Yeah, well, if I talk about the business's purpose, even 21 Leadership was formed on a core belief that leadership is the competitive advantage in business today. I think if you take any two similar types of organizations, either one of them can invest in IT or increase their salaries to bring a different level of talent in. But my belief is that it's the one who has the greater capability internally at all levels to coach and lead and motivate and inspire and change that will be more successful in the long run. And everything we do kind of falls out from that. So, I've spent, previous to COVID, probably most of the time working on what would essentially be cultural projects. Since June of last year, I've worked with more senior teams, than I had done in the previous couple of years, because there are a lot of teams who are coming back together and resetting or having to revisit strategy because they've spent the last couple of years just keeping the doors open. I've got a team, Matt, for example, who is the talent guru, in my opinion. He was a former head of talent development, global head of talent development at Milne Entertainment, and he joined the team having been a client previously. And he's just really revolutionizing how his clients look at talent and high performance. Alistair, who sits with us as part of the team, he's brilliant when it comes to cross-cultural stuff and cross-cultural leadership teams working together. But it all really filters back to that thing that the more and better leaders we have in organizations, then the better able they are to perform and enjoy the process.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thanks for that. It's really kind of fills in the gaps that I didn't make in my that I left in the introduction. So I'll talk a little bit about what we're going to be talking about in a moment, but just for people who are joining us, and we'll probably have people joining us as we continue the conversation as well, is to really kind of be well, first of all, we're obviously doing this as a live stream. This will also be going out as a podcast on our podcast as well, which is engaging. I see Ethan, if you could maybe just pop up the link there for the podcast for those people who are watching the stream but maybe aren't familiar with the podcast. So if anybody wants to subscribe to the podcast, we have interviews. We don't always do them as live streams. We often just do them as recorded audio. But if any of you do want to listen to other interviews that we've done previously and in the future, then fine. Obviously, if you're listening to this as the podcast, then there's no surprise there. Then and obviously we'd like some interaction. If any of you got any questions, anybody wants to anybody wants to sort of pitch in, anybody's got anything they want to say, please do so, and we'll get that. We'll build that into the conversation. So what we're going to be talking about today is we've titled this "Hopeful Internal Communications," and I guess I was thinking about this morning, Richard, and I guess people might have read it and thought, kind of hopeful in terms of hitting hope. As in, let's just stick this out there and hope that our people understand it. That isn't what we're talking about today. We're talking more about the idea that we want to build hope. We want to rebuild hope. We've been through 2 really tough years, and we're likely to face more going into the future. Just want to understand that. What we mean by hopeful internal, and we're talking about this from an internal communications context. Obviously, in your introduction, you were saying that that your for primary area is leadership, but I know that involves internal communication. Do you want to just sort of talk a little bit about what we're talking about when we talk about hopefulness in whatever we're doing, whether it's internal communications, leadership development, or whatever context we're looking at that, please, Richard?
Yeah, and I know this came from an article that I wrote last year, and I think at the heart of it, as leaders, we have a job to give the people who we lead hope for the future. And I think that's true of any period of time, and especially now, and especially over the last couple of years. And I know lots of the audience for this particular conversation are internal communications. And I think there's sometimes a challenge there in that their internal stakeholders have a message. And it might be that your internal stakeholder as an internal comms person isn't thinking through those lenses. But what I was really noticing over the last couple of years, understandably, is that so many people are more operationally focused than they might be. There are challenges that are in the UK, at least probably partly due to Brexit, partly due to COVID in terms of a lack of resource. And there are loads of real problems out there, and I'm not talking about ignoring them. But if we give our people hope and we make them feel engaged and inspired, they're more likely to stay with us. They're more likely to do a better job. And those 2 things in themselves seep out, and therefore our customers or our guests or our clients or our visitors have a better experience. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, it's an absolute no-brainer. But I noticed in the clients that we're working with, certainly some of the organizations who were coming to us to talk to us about things, that it just seemed to have been forgotten. That people down the line need some hope, and we all do. Don't get us wrong. When I read the article back this morning, ready for this, one of the things I said in there, I know whatever role we're in, we really should have our leader giving us hope as well.
Yeah.
But if we're in this kind of position, if we're an internal comms person and we're influencing how people feel by what we communicate out, then even if our leader isn't doing a brilliant job of it, then we have a duty to have that as one of the lenses to not just bring people on the journey, not just get the message across, but to make sure that we're giving messages that engender a sense of hope.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Okay. No, that's really clear. Thanks for clarifying that, Richard. So we're going to talk a little bit about hope, and you've kind of articulated there why building hope into communications is really important. And I agree with you. I think there's a sense of I think there's a lot of things. I was talking about this yesterday. I think there's a lot of things going on at the moment. We're kind of all familiar with many of us are probably familiar with this kind of term, the Great Resignation. The fact that a lot of people are kind of reevaluating why they work, why they do what they do. Do I want to spend the rest of my life doing whatever it is I'm doing? And I think kind of building some hope into our communications about what we're doing as an organization, connecting that to our purpose, and really kind of helping people to understand that is really important. Now, I know you wrote a blog about this, which is kind of how I and obviously, as I said, we've known each other for a while, but I saw your blog and I thought that'd be a really good thing to talk to you about. And you flagged up 3 areas in that blog that I think are really practical things that internal communicators, employee engagers can really kind of focus on. So I'd like to explore those with you in turn, because I think they're areas that we're really passionate about as well in the work that we do. So I think, it'd be really interesting to see how our kind of particular perspectives on these overlap. So the first of these, Richard, is and these are obviously this is your framework and your words. So creating a shared, inspiring vision. Now, I guess every organization thinks it's got an inspiring vision that it's shared and created and shared with its people. Tell us why that is so important. What the linkage between that and what we're talking about today, this idea of building hope into our comms and engagement processes.
Yeah, and I do feel like vision as part of what I would class the cultural narrative. So cultural narratives of most organizations are made up of some combination of vision, purpose, values, sometimes mission. And if they've been lucky enough to work with you, Craig, it'll be in a beautiful visual format that actually the process that leads to that will have got people engaged in them. So, but one of the interesting things over the last 10 years is because of this kind of success and buy-in, primarily Simon Sinek's work around purpose, vision's kind of been forgotten. I believe it's much less prominent than it was probably 15 years ago. And where vision is so vital and so helpful is really from a psychological point of view, in my perspective, which is all of us as human beings, whether we're towards motivated or away from motivated, we all really do have a sense of wanting to know that there's some certainty in the future. That's why we use phrases like light at the end of the tunnel. And if we don't have that, future perspective that it might be even better than it is right now, or this is where we're going to, actually we don't get any certainty from the past. Because if the past was better, then we pine for it and we go, oh God, it's not as good as it was then. If the past was worse, then we don't get much joy from visiting it anyway. So the fact that visions have kind of, in lots of organizations, in my view, been kind of set to the side means there's a piece missing in terms of that hope for the future, or that engage and inspiring piece that we can look forward to. And when visions are done well, when visions are done properly, when they are created in such a way that they are aspirational and that they are inclusive, that pretty much everyone in the organization can look at and say, I don't know how we're going to get there, but I really want to be part of it. Then they do get people out of bed. They do keep people engaged in organizations in a way that certainly strategic goals, as important as I think they are, don't and shouldn't. That's not what they're for. But even purpose, purpose can connect us with why we might go to an organization in the first place, or why we might be there now. But if you add on to that a vision which makes me go, oh, and this is where we're working towards in the future, and this is what I can buy into, and I can see my role in helping us to get closer to it, that's something that energizes and engages and gives us hope.
Yeah. So a few things there, Richard. So I mean, I guess first of all, and then we've kind of we've got the assumption that everybody uses a similar term for vision, and as you know, and I'm sure we come across this all the time, and I'm sure you do in your work. There's a lot of interchangeable terminology. People talk about mission, vision, purpose, values interchangeably, and think they're talking about the same thing. I don't know about you. I've always been quite and I think we have a consistent definition on this from the way you've just articulated vision. I often go back to kind of the good to great stuff, in terms of Jim Collins and that kind of sense of and I know using Apollo moon landing analogies are always a bit cheesy and well worn, but I always remember it in my head. Kind of in the moon race to the moon. The mission was to beat the Russians, and the vision was to have an American flag on the moon before a Russian one. It was the tangible, kind of sense of achievement, whereas the, beating the Russians wasn't just going to end by getting to the moon first. It was like an eternal thing that we would never actually get to. It was always moving away from us, but it was our kind of sense of direction. So I think what you've said there is it's that tangible. I can see and feel what it'll look like when we've achieved what we all this effort that we're putting together is what the vision should be. I'm interested in your thought on this, which is a lot of visions are very, we're going to be the number one in our market. We're going to be seen as the we're going to have double digit growth. It's often very tangible and not necessarily, it might be really motivating for the guys and girls at the boardroom table, but for the people, at this front end, it's like, really, is that going to get me kind of hopeful and excited? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and this is so you've touched on something that I'm like, I feel like I'm becoming increasingly passionate about, and I think it's partly because I'm hanging around with it. Maybe it's an age thing as well, I don't know. But I'm far from a pedant, but I'm becoming increasingly certain that making really good distinctions between what we mean in an organization is really important. So I was working with a really prestigious arts organization. I don't think they might. I was working with the Royal Academy yesterday. We were having this conversation yesterday, and I said we were talking about things like strategy and culture and vision, and I said I'm going to give you my definitions, but if you as a senior team disagree with me on my definitions, but you totally agree with each other, that's most important. And I think, for me, that's something I've realized more and more, that, when we're in a senior team, and I think this is so true for internal communications people as well, because you're the hub of communication, you should be able to sit down. And if we take vision as the example, if I went round everyone who sits in that role in the organization, say, what's a vision, what's a vision, what's a vision, what's a vision, everyone should give the same answer. And if I then say, assuming you've got a vision, what is your vision or the vision of the organization? Everyone should be able to give me broadly the same answer. So that's one thing. And that's where it leads us on to answer your second question, is that's why we make a clear distinction between the strategy and the strategic goals, which are the smart, measurable, achievable, realistic-ish, time-bound stuff, the EBITDA we've got to deliver, the growth we've got to deliver, or whatever. And then the cultural stuff, which, as I say, in my view, typically is purpose, values, and vision. And we know what we mean. So when we're talking about one thing, we don't get it mixed up. And so, for example, if I talk about vision, my kind of definition, if you like, is vision is that inspiring, aspirational, inclusive, engaging, motivating picture and sense of the future. And as you say, in my view, it doesn't have to be smart, because we might get to the point where we don't fully realize it. It doesn't have to be completely deliverable. We should know when we're there, but it's not something that's measured in KPIs and numbers, versus, say, purpose, which is more, why do we exist at all and why should anyone care? So just having those distinctions is really useful. But I think you're right.
And I think that's a really good point, is that as long as they have a consistent definition within their organization, I don't know any, I think we're fairly aligned, but I don't know any two consultants or kind of trainers who kind of agree on it. So why should we try and force them? So I think that's right. I mean, just as a matter of interest, I think we come at this from a rather than whether it's vision, mission, or whatever, we come at it from actually a series of questions that we should be able to answer. So why are we changing? What are we aiming for? How will we get there? Now, how will we get there? You could articulate as the strategy, but you could also articulate it as the values as well, because, the strategy is the roadmap, but the values are going to tell us, whether we're on the road and we're doing it the right way, whether we're, we're actually, because you can follow a strategy in the right and the wrong way, or I won't get political, but anyway, but
I agree. So from a cultural point of view, I look and say, well, the vision is the cultural picture of the future. But as exactly as you said, for me, the values are the how. Like, I often talk about the values being the cultural compass. That really is the sense of how we be around here, which is my definition of culture. So and again, I'm not just saying this, I've said it to you before. What I love about what you do is you you combine those elements together in such a way that it's almost inescapable for people to buy into it. If people look at the work that you do and have gone through the process and decide and don't buy into it, then they are, they're right. They're definitely not in the right organization. So, and that, and that is for me, the power of what you do, and something that we focus on really strongly, that any of this stuff, if it's stuck up on a wall somewhere, or if it's on a mouse mat, or it's, the only time people hear about it is in their kind of 2-day induction, then it's a waste of time. The only thing worse than having not having a vision or a set of values is having ones that are just kind of dormant. That's how I got into all of the stuff around culture. Actually, my last proper in-house job, there was a set of values created from on high and sent down to all of the business areas. And in the office where I worked down in County Durham, there were values hung from the ceiling on on big kind of cardboard like plates, and they were hung from the false ceiling, but the wires were quite low, and once a week I'd see people going down, and if they were my height or taller, they'd either have to duck them or they'd brush their heads on them. And when I saw that, I'd go out and say, do you mind, can you tell me what the values were that were sent from head office a couple of months ago? And people would go, oh, so there was one about customer, but I can't remember the rest. And they'd literally just banged their heads on them. And I just think whatever we do culturally has to be the opposite of that. It's got to be genuinely engaging and bring people on the journey.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if the value, we see this all the time. It's all around, broadcasting rather than having a conversation around them, around operationalizing them. And we're kind of, and I know this is similar to the stuff you do. We're very keen on people sharing story, educating and encouraging people to share stories of where we've seen our colleagues at our best living the values, and that then people start to think, they start to be more attuned to looking out for people living the values. They're kind of thinking, okay, but if they know there's a process where they can talk about it, but also it helps people articulate their definition of the value in their world, because if you've got a value like integrity, which I think, and I'm not a massive fan of single word values because they have multiple opportunities to be defined differently. But for me to be able to, I work in a factory and I pack whatever, or I work in a financial services call center, or I'm a front of office, whatever. For me to be able to talk about integrity in my world, in my job, how I perceive integrity, helps to sort of normalize what we mean as an organization, because I think nobody has a monopoly on what we mean when we talk about terms like that, because everybody has their own personal values that they bring to the table as well.
Yeah, and I know we're wandering slightly off from the vision bit, but I think it's incredibly useful for the audience. There's a piece of research by Jim Cousins and Barry Posner, who wrote my favorite leadership book of all time, which is called The Leadership Challenge. And they've done some amazing research over the last 35 years. The next iteration's just about to come out, and there's some really interesting stuff relating to pandemic in there. But one of their pieces of research is specifically around values. And it says that if you have an organization where there aren't a set of espoused organizational values, but everybody knows what their own values are and there are opportunities to talk about values, then engagement will be positive. Versus if you have an organization that creates a set of values in a very traditional way and just broadcasts them, use your word because it's absolutely right, and tells people this is what our values are, but there's no conversation about them, then that actually can lead to a decrease in values. But of course, decrease in engagement. But of course, where the sweet spot comes is where there are a set of organizations that are alive and breathing and that are created, using a process like yours or like mine, where people contribute to them and get to talk about them, and that those values are linked to and reflective of the most commonly shared personal values of the people who are the organization. And that's why processes like yours work. So that ability for me at my level, in my role, in whatever area, to be able to say, this is what this value means to me, and how, not necessarily formally, and this is how it connects to mine, but I can make sense
Mm.
of it in the connection. That is really the sweet spot. So, when we're creating internal communications, especially in organizations that have strongly espoused values, even if they're not necessarily strongly lived values,
Yeah.
it's so important to keep that in mind, because I know we both worked in at least one organization where there was a set of values and then a whole set of descriptors. I worked in one organization. I don't think we were in there together, but we went in. We were asked to help them bring their values to life. There were 5 values and 8 descriptors under each value.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what happens is, instead of there being 5 things for me to connect to and make sense of and live, there's actually becomes 40.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't work, because I might buy into the top line, but there's 3 or 4 things underneath that don't really resonate.
Yeah.
So so the whole process of building them right helps, and then keeping conversations, keeping them front and center, integrating them into how we do things, etc., is so vital, and that absolutely points to internal communications as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've just put a note on there, which we've got some resources, some tools that people can use if they want to kind of explore this. And particularly, we've got a resource in there which is very much around kind of operationalizing your values, which is something we're really passionate about. Okay, so we did digress a little bit, but it was good. I think it was a good area to explore. Let's go on to your second point. So we've covered shared vision and a shared and inspiring vision. So the second element of building hope into our internal communications is to remind people how they contribute to the success of the business. So it sounds obvious, well, yeah, of course we do that all the time. Why is that important? And but also, what are some of the kind of the pitfalls that we sometimes come across when we think we've done it, but not necessarily made the connections that we want?
Yeah. So this came at least partly from, again, some work that we did a few years ago, where we looked at a number of the engagement surveys that are out there, the kind of big name engagement surveys, and we mapped them together to find out what the consistencies were, to find out what are the things that seem like they're the most common things that keep people engaged in organizations. And we kind of came out with the top 4. And the top one by far was we badge as My Manager Cares, which I think we're probably going to come on to it in a bit. So I'll skip over that for now. But the second one really was, in some it talked about pride in the brand, or the vision, the mission. Others, it was really, does what I do matter? And I think when we put that together, what it says to me is, especially in times like this, where people need to feel a sense of hope, the more that we can let them know how what they do makes a difference and connects and contributes, and whether that's in a hard measure way, or whether that's in a more cultural way, or ideally both, then it's better than not. And I think I've been party over the last couple of years to so much communication, which is focused on what we're not able to do, what we have to stop doing, what people aren't doing. It's almost like, as soon as the world started opening up properly again last year, we went from people potentially on furlough, not knowing if their organization or their job's going to exist anymore, to getting a bit of a kick-in because we've got, basically, because we haven't got enough resources to deliver whatever it is the customer really needs. So again, I'm not necessarily talking about having to warm stroke people all the time. Again, we'll come back to that in a few minutes. But if I'm in a customer facing business and I see the customer every day, it's clear how I contribute. But it might be that if I'm in an IT role, or even a marketing role, or if I'm in a customer facing and I don't see the customer, yet I'm equally working as hard on less resources than I need, to then have somebody, ideally my boss, come along and say, you need to remember that when you do this, it means that happens, or you've contributed that, and then this. It gives people a sense of, there's a point to doing this, which gives me hope. And there's a very practical thing, and I know it's not very kind of sexy, but making sure that if you lead or manage people, making sure people's performance measures are right and appropriate.
Yeah.
Do I have a set of performance measures that clearly tells me what doing a good job looks like and what not doing a good job looks like?
Yeah.
And ideally then having a set of performance measures that also on top of that gives me a bit of stretch. This is what a good job looks like, and this is what a great job looks like. Unfortunately, lots of performance management systems or performance measurement systems help people to understand what a really average job looks like.
I agree.
Which helps in the context of as long as I'm doing that and contributing, making a difference. But if you've got a bit of stretch on the test, if you also do that, then you're kind of overperforming or you're doing an amazing job. That really helps. But sometimes I see people who have performance measures that they can't ever deliver themselves. So they might work in some kind of retail unit or retail outlet, and they have a measure about the customer satisfaction in the whole store or the whole unit. Well, they can't affect that totally themselves. If we get all that right, so people look at it and go, actually, I know that what I did today makes a difference to the overall game. It gives people a sense of hope.
Yeah, it's actually, you mentioned earlier smart, and then everybody's a smart objective, everybody, but it cuts because it's one of the things that really bugs me, because when I first learned about what smart, the acronym SMART meant, I was taught it in the way I think it should be. So specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Now, a lot of people say realistic. Now, for me, realistic is the same as achievable. If it's not achievable, it's not realistic. But relevant, that is different. And that's exactly what you've just said there. Relevant is actually, I can actually influence that. It's something that I can, and it links to my contribution to the organization rather than being something that's like you say, and I know what you mean. When people, I used to work in the food industry, and people would be, part of their reward system would be based around, kind of things that it was like, it was like a sort of minuscule contribution that they could possibly make to it. But, and I understood why organizations did it, because you want everybody to be, this North Star and what we were talking about earlier. But it just felt like I could do a really bad job and I could still get rewarded for something I had just no impact on at all.
So I love your SMART acronym. I consider that stolen. I'll nick that from now.
That's fine.
My issue with realistic has always been a slightly different one, which is lots of the SMART goals that I see in the organizations I work with are not actually very realistic. They know they're achievable because they've done unrealistic things before. But when you work in organizations, again, as I know you do, where they've done double digit growth, and they just, and then my kind of longest standing client, I remember seeing kind of their strategy kind of growth chart. This is going back a little way, and it just they called it the quickening because they were going to grow so quickly, and then they had the quickening 2. And then, they continue to do it. There's nothing realistic about that, but they've done it every time. But relevant is better. Consider that.
You can have that one. That's free. But I mean, what you've said there is absolutely, I agree with. I mean, we use this analogy all the time when we're talking with clients. Is a bit like, your organizational is like a huge jigsaw puzzle. All the pieces are scattered all over the table. Some people, if they're lucky enough, will know how their bit connects with maybe the ones around it. But how many times do we show them the lid of the box to sort of pan out and say, look, that thing you're doing over there has all of this kind of a contribution to the whole, the supply chain, the ecosystem of the organization. And as you say, I think really helping people to understand that and having managers who can, and I know we're going to talk about this in the final point that we're going to talk about, this whole, I think a really key part of a manager or leader's job is that thing that you just said there. It's showing people how important they are to the business, because sometimes people just don't realize that. Even in quite senior roles, I found it where, they're almost quite self-deprecating about what I just work in, and I know organizations who've consciously been through a process of, when they work, they've worked in a function that's described as a support function, that they've actually consciously said, you're not using that language anymore. We're not talking about support functions, because it just sounds like, we're there to, hold up the really important parts of the business.
Yeah, totally. And I'm going to make some generalizations here. No generalizations are true, but if I think of the kind of talent programs that I've led over the years, so quite often you've got some people who are obviously from across different areas, and typically the finance person will say, in their kind of introduction or whatever, or at some point will go, "Oh, but I don't think I'm a typical finance person," almost being like apologetic and that hoping that people won't avoid them. And as they say it, pretty much everyone in the room goes, no, 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 God, we need you. If it wasn't for you, then X, Y, and Z. And yeah, sometimes if you might, tighten the budget strings, we don't always like it, but we really appreciate it and value it. And in some ways, I think it sounds quite fundamental and quite basic, but and if I look at it from a leadership perspective, there's a point at which our technical expertise, whether it's as a finance person or a marketing person or an L&D person or an HR person, that stops becoming the most important thing that we do. That actually we make a transition that means that it's our leadership capability that's most important, our ability to coach and lead, motivate, inspire, change, all of that stuff. Now, that's not to say that the technical expertise isn't important, because it's that technical expertise that's probably got us to that point. And I really believe that transition from a kind of sort of fairly senior manager to a leadership position is the most difficult for most people in their career. But what it also means for some people is that up until this point, I've had a set of KPIs that if we deliver this many widgets, or if I deliver this much of cost saving, or if I deliver these campaigns and this brand awareness, I know that I'm doing a good job. We get to a certain level where it's not really like that anymore, that my measures really become all about ensuring that everyone below me hierarchically delivers their measures. Sometimes that can feel really kind of disorientating in the first few years. And if we can get through that, then often they're the people who go on to be really, good, strong leaders. But also we could remember that if I'm a I don't know, a junior accountant or somewhere fairly junior in one of those functions that aren't customer facing, they might be feeling that every day, because how does me pulling this lever or writing this report, how does that help us to be, the best, soft drink seller in the world, or the best theme park in the world? But if we going back to the original point, that feels hopeless. And at the moment, it's not good enough to leave our people feeling hopeless. The more we can reinforce these messages, not just, hey, we all make a difference, not we're all in the same boat, but actually here's how and here's why what you do makes a difference. That gives people hope, and therefore helps them to contribute more and do a better job and add more value.
Yeah, and I think none more so than a lot of the people who'll be listening or watching this is internal communications. I think over the last few months and over the last couple of years, I think I've spoken to a lot of internal communications people through the podcast who have said, I've gone from, oh, can you write this email and send it out to all of the people across the organization for me, to being, could you come to this meeting and help us to shape what it is we're going to do in response to this as a communications expert. And I think that that shift, long may it last, but I think a whole range of support functions, I'm using inverted commas there, who have actually have risen to the fore and shown their value, and hopefully that will continue. So
and there's one thing above anything else that I think would help that to continue, and would help internal communications teams and individuals to keep adding value and keep giving hope. And I should put my tin hat on for this, really, because I wrote an article again, probably 10 or 15 years ago now, certainly more than 10 years ago, with the crux of which was lots of internal communications are a waste of time. And I got a bit of a backlash for it, probably rightly so, because of how it was written. But my point still stands, that there isn't enough outcomes-focused communication. And the biggest shift, and I'm sure lots of people kind of watching or listening to this, if they're internal comms people, I hope this is obvious to them. But I see so many internal communications that are kind of a bit created as if it's FYI.
Yeah.
And I go back to the point, and this is how we design all of our programs. It's how I, write stuff. It's how I decide to do things like this. I go, what do I want people to do differently as a result of this?
Yeah.
What will actually be the impact of this? Not that people will know things, but actually, what do I want them to do differently as a result of this communication?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we can design all of our communications with that in mind, and that includes being really quite diligent and harsh, that if we look at that and go, actually, I don't want them to do anything different, then we probably don't need to communicate it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if it's about creating excitement, we've got to write it or create a whole experience in a way that creates excitement. Or if it makes people go, oh crikey, actually we've got to do this, then we write it or create the experience in that way. If we're really diligent about that, that for me adds real value to our internal stakeholders when we're internal comms people, because I still don't think it's completely the norm.
No.
I still think there is too much where an internal customer of whatever sort says, we've got to make sure people get this message.
Yeah.
And if I give an example, and internal comms were part of this, they weren't the whole thing, but we worked with a big energy years ago where there was a real challenge with health and safety. And I know that's something that you guys are absolutely brilliant at, engaging people in health and safety messages. But this organization weren't. They could have definitely benefited from you. And they'd communicated and communicated and communicated, and their number one strategic imperative was kind of health and safety. And it was only when we were peripheral to the project, we were doing some essentially some communication skills stuff with the senior team. It was only when I sat and said, if you say your number one strategic imperative is zero harm, when that works, what is actually going to be different as a result of it?
Yeah.
And they distilled it down to essentially every child whose parent works for the organization will get their parent back safe and healthy at the end of each day. And it sounds like a small distinction, but it changed the nature of their communications quite significantly, and that kind of outcomes focus, I think, makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a few things there you've said. I mean, one on that latter one, we work with a really good health and safety consultant, and one of the things he talks about is that, again, changing the language. So, in a lot of health and safety areas, people talk about lost time injuries or lost time accidents. What he encourages organizations to do is I can't remember the exact term he uses now, but it's lost quality of life incident. So, again, it reframes it from just being lost time, as in, we're gonna have to find somebody else to do their job because they're off work because they've hurt themselves, to actually we've degraded someone's quality of life through allowing them to get injured, or through so that I think language is really important in that. But no, I mean, I think all of the things you just talked about there, I think, a lot of internal communicators who I talk to are very, I think they're very astute, and they know we should be trying to we should be thinking about what do we want people to think, feel, and do differently. Exactly what you said there. It's not just about, there's a bit of cognitive stuff. There was a bit of understanding and knowledge. We want them to an emotional connection, what we're doing, but actually then we want them to go and do something differently. That's the whole point of communicating in the first place. I think sometimes they just end up under pressure to, well, we know we should be doing all of that sort of stuff, but we just need to tell them, and they just need to understand. And I think there's a danger sometimes that, that is not their choice, but they have to kind of, that they have to do what and sometimes what we're asked to do, or there's sort of a no debate sort of thing. But I think one of the things we always do with clients is to similar to, and I think it's probably very similar to what you do, is we almost, when a client comes to us and says we want you to do your great big picture things for us, is we almost try and talk them out of it, which sounds like a really strange thing to do, but so why this? Why are you doing it now? Why are you doing this? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Why do you want to do it now? And why do you want to use us? Because, if they can answer those questions, we know we're the right person for them. We're the right company for them to work with them. And we know that and we know that they've been through that thought process. And I think if internal communicators, and I appreciate sometimes, you know, there is a kind of a directive and you just need to help us to communicate this, but if you can, you know, be a consultant, a trusted advisor with your senior leadership team and say, why do we want to do it? Why do we want to do it now? And why do we want to do it in the way that you've asked me to do it? And is there any flexibility to do it in a way that might be more engaging and more sticky and more chance of, you know, getting that end result that you've talked about? I think that trusted advisor status is what a lot of internal comms people are achieving and striving for. I'm conscious of time, Richard. Sorry, I'll just let you respond to that, and then I want to go on to the final point.
No, I was kind of just going to agree. You know, anything and everything that we ever need to know is out there. It's stuck on a wall. It's on an internet. It's on an intranet. It's in a book somewhere. The game for me is getting people. If it's we've got to follow these steps, or we've got to, you know, the game is to get people to look at the information and then want to, like when we do some stuff, we do stuff on creating a customer experience and distinction between service and experience. It's getting people to want to do because they want to, because it's important to them. And then actually, if we think about that, that's the game that we're trying to get through with what we communicate. It tends to then be somewhat less about the content and more about the approach. And I know somebody's asked about, is there, you know, some platforms that don't work, you know, do emails not work, or do, you know, intranet systems not work? And the answer to that's probably quite glib, but like, if you know something doesn't work in your organization, do something different.
Yeah.
You know, in some organizations, you know, emails get batterings in lots of organizations, but loads of organizations, that's the best way to communicate. But if it doesn't work, then, you know, let's not be afraid to go, actually, let's send a WhatsApp out. The best engagement piece I think I've ever seen was a Facebook group. Essentially a Facebook group. And I'm not going to all the detail of it, but if I said to most of my clients, you know what you should do to increase engagement, create a Facebook group, they would laugh me out of the place. But it was right for those people in that organization. So it's all about the outcomes, Craig.
It's knowing your audience. I mean, workplace, for, you know, Facebook have got a business corporate solution now, which I know a lot of organizations are using. I think it's understanding what makes things like that.
Craig, honestly, I know we need to move on, but that is, I'm so glad you brought it up. Like, that is a perfect example. I can't, and this is controversial, so if people don't agree, that's fine. But I can't tell you the amount of times I've been in conversations with people where they go, everybody's on Facebook, so why don't we introduce workplace?
Yeah.
And I go, it's up to you, but nobody's on workplace. Everyone's on Facebook, so why don't you use that?
I know,
it's a great example of overcomplicating the challenge.
Yeah.
And I see it with learning platforms. I see it with, you know, and again, I'm not being critical. If workplace works, that's great. But don't look at one platform and go, right, everyone's using WhatsApp, so why don't we set up a Yammer?
Yeah.
You know, that it's, you know, if we can get a Yammer to work, that's brilliant. But if everyone's using WhatsApp and we need to get messages across, let's use WhatsApp or Signal or whatever. It's that kind of outcome fit for purpose. What's my old, but Kimberly here, who's my kind of guru, that, you know, everyone who's worked with us knows that I worked for Kim for 8 years, and she was always just on about what's the quickest, most elegant way to get to where we need to get to.
Yeah.
And keep things as simple as possible.
There's a lovely metaphor for that. I don't know whether you've ever come across Roger von Ouch's creative whack pack. Have you ever come across that before?
I've heard of it. Yeah, I've heard of it.
But it's a series of like little fables and stories to get you to think differently from a creative perspective. And there's a lovely story in that, which is, you know, when they build these new kind of developments and new houses and apartments and whatever, and they lay all these like really, you know, lovely paths, and then people just walk across the grass and ignore them. And so what they did is they built, you know, this, I mean, it may be kind of apocryphal, but anyway, the idea was that they built the apartments. They didn't put any paving stones down. They just left the grass and then let everybody walk where they wanted, and then they paved those paths, which is like a kind of, you know, why don't we do that more in our work? Give people the freedom to find the path of least resistance, and then and then build our structures around that, rather than, you know, like the kind of build it and they will come mentality, which we often deploy. But anyway, I want to get onto a final point, because this is one I hope we've got enough time, because this is one that I really like. So we've talked about creating an inspired, a shared inspiring vision. We've talked about helping people, showing people how they contribute and success of business. the last one, which is catching people doing things well, catching people doing things right. Tell us all about that, Richard.
Well, listen, if this conversation had been 10 years ago, in somebody had said, "Oh, you'll be talking about catching people doing things well on a live stream," I would have laughed, because it's so basic. And there was a long period of time, and I never mentioned it, but I think, again, always, but especially at the moment, it's such a fundamental, basic, no-brainer, quick win that very few people are doing. How often do we make it a habit, or even just do when it occurs to us, to turn around to somebody and say, I was listening to the conversation, I don't know what they were saying, but I heard what you were saying and I thought it was really good. And there's a reason, I know I was saying this to you the other day, Craig, it's occurred to us now that there's a reason that the 1 Minute Manager is one of the best-selling business books of all time. And then it occurred to us that it's about, I think it's probably about 50 years old. It's certainly over 40, I think. There's probably a whole generation of internal comms people, managers, leaders out there who haven't even heard of it, maybe, or certainly never read it. It's about 12,000 words long, and what it says in its essence still stands today. Manage by walking round, catch people doing things well, and give them the feedback there and there on time. And that's my kind of, shortened version of it. But I would. There's a hotel I check into really regularly, and I often go check in an evening. And I know for years and years and years and years, they've had a challenge getting night staff. And they generally run with a night manager, kind of night duty manager, and one receptionist stroke doing lots of other things. And I checked in before Christmas, and it was the best experience I've ever had checking in an evening. And I've been there at least hundreds of times. And I just said to the person who was checking us in, that was amazing. Often I don't get a brilliant experience at night. I really like the way you're doing it. You were really professional. You made loads of eye contact, but it was kind of really nice. You had that balance perfectly well. And she pretty much went, and I thought, and I spoke to other people in the hotel and said, "Oh, she's brilliant," and they were like, "Oh yeah, she's great. You kind of got our eye on her." And I thought, actually, but I'm not sure she's getting that feedback up to that point. And I'm not, things like star awards, where people are nominated for things. All of that's brilliant. But if you hear somebody doing something well in your organization, no matter how big or small, just tell them. Yeah. Just give them that feedback. And if you're a manager, you're a leader, make it a habit of that's part of what you do. Even if you can't manage by walking around because you're on Zoom or Teams all the time, when you notice it or you see something delivered, just tell people. Just tell people. I'm not saying if I send you a good email, I'm not saying you ring us and go, "Richard, that was utterly amazing." I'm not going over the top gushy praise, but just catch people doing things well and tell them. Yeah. And I don't think there's anybody I know who does that enough. Yeah. Probably including me, by the way. But
no, there but for the grace go all of us. But I mean, no, I know we talked about this the other day. And I think it's the Lasada Principle, or there are other things out there, which is this idea that, our theoretically the optimal performance comes around with when you have 3 positive interactions with 1 corrective interaction. And I often, when working with clients on other projects, we sometimes ask them, where do you think your ratio lies on this? And it's often really interesting. I'm just interested, we've just put a note up on there on the screen just for questions, just so we've got we'll put a bit of time in for that last 5 minutes, just on that at scale. So you've said about, star awards are great, and, employee of the month and all of these sorts of things. And I agree, they're good. I think when I see this, case study, employee stories, they tend to be a little bit overproduced and a little bit like, oh yes, so and so's in the company newsletter or on Yammer again. What about us? We never get any recognition. Sometimes you get a bit of a reaction to that. It's not always perceived. I think it's more organic. It's what you've said. It's like, how do we build an environment where people can just go out and have a natural conversation with someone, and I've seen this happen loads of times before, where, you know, you encourage someone, you know, it goes back to the 1 minute manager again, you know, go up management by walking about, and just go and talk to someone and show some genuine interest in what they're doing and just help them. And it goes back to what we were just saying before, you know, do you realize that thing that you just done there really kind of makes a massive difference to the customer or the end user or the patient or whatever context? I think internal comms people just sometimes get a bit kind of overwhelmed by, well, how do we do that? And let's just do what we've always done, which is the kind of big awards and the big celebrations. It's more about how do we create that culture and that environment where people can do that, I think, more organically. Would you agree?
Yeah, and if I was to be really, you know, I know this, if it's not the culture in an organization, this doesn't cure it. But if I'm an internal comms person and I'm wrestling with that, while I wrestle with it, the next time I sit down and have a brief or have a meeting with an internal customer and they give me a really good brief, you know, and they make it easier, I make sure that I tell them. You know,
Yeah.
if it isn't the culture, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be the weird one in the room that says, look, I don't know if this is appropriate because I know you're technically more senior than us or whatever, but I have loads of these meetings and sometimes they're not as easy as this one. You've just made my job really easy to do this. So thanks very much indeed.
Yeah, I do as well. I mean, we work with, you know, we end up sometimes working with people who are, you know, just coordinating things for us. You know, we need them to help organize people's diaries because we need lots of meetings with lots of senior people, and they just do it really, really well. And I always make a point of saying to them, I've worked with a lot of people who do what you've just done there, and you've done that really, really well, and I really appreciate it. And your hotel story, you can tell some, you know, that's the first time anyone's really taken time. Sometimes that, you know, and I always mention it to my court contact as well and say, by the way, so and so's been absolutely brilliant. I know you realise you've got a real kind of gem there, and really great, you know, great potential. And sometimes I go, yeah, we know, and you kind of think, yeah, but have you told him or her that? Yeah.
And that's it for me, because sometimes people say, oh, I don't know about that because I don't really like praise and I wouldn't want to put anyone. No. What you don't like is, like, at the call center I used to work in years and years ago, if somebody had hit the best numbers, they got, like, stood on a chair and applauded and given a bottle of wine in front of everyone. Some people love that. Some people hate it.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone who hates somebody coming up and saying, thank you very much, that was a really good job, or you did a really good job there, you did this and this, and that's what you should keep going. Good job.
Yeah.
I just don't.
And with sincerity.
And if any of us should be able to do that. If you can't, you know, some people say, oh, I'm not very good at feedback. Really? You can't, like, you're not very good at going, thank you very much, that was really good. Do that again.
And telling people why it was really good and what the consequences.
Absolutely. You know, look, our favorite feedback model, and this is nicked from Ben Morton, who used to work with us, and it's a great basic. If you don't think you're good at feedback, www.ebi. What went well, even better if. Now, you don't have to do both of them all at the same time, but if you go on somebody as a manager, leader, going down saying, look, that was really good, and this is what I thought was good, and that's what I think you should do well again. It's the simplest thing to do. And again, if you work in a toxic culture or a negative culture, it's not going to shift the whole thing around. But it's better than nothing. And you know, imagine your partner, imagine your most loved one came home from work tonight and said, hey, my boss or somebody, my boss's colleague came along and just said, thanks very much, you did a really good job. It's kind of almost the stuff that legends are built on. I'd like to say, as much as being in the Times top 100 or best companies or anything like that.
Yeah. Richard, that's been fantastic. I just want to see. I know Ethan's. You said there were some comments coming. I can't see them. I don't know what. It's my. I'm kind of running this show, but I don't know how to see any comments. Have we got any questions, Ethan, to pop on the screen, or any comments? All right. Or any platforms or comment methods that don't work? Email. I think you mentioned that, Richard. Thank you, Crystal. I mean, I'll give my take on it. I'll let you give your take. I think you said, you know. I think emails. I think all tools used appropriately are good and you know, do the job that they're intended to. I think email gets a bad rap. I think it kind of just can contribute towards overwhelm. I was doing a webinar yesterday where I kind of share a bit of information. I think it's on average, people who work with and get a lot of emails, I think it's 36 times an hour we check our emails. This is the kind of industry, you know, societal average at work, and there's this interruption productivity issue where, you know, whenever we're working on something, an email pops up, we open it, we read it, we do something with it, then we, you know, and obviously there are personal productivity things around that which can mitigate it. But I think, you know, platforms and comms, I think all have their place. I think, you know, our story, the conversation we had about is rather than build it and they will come, find out what people are using already organically, amplify that. Also, and we've got a podcast coming up on this in a few weeks' time, which is I'm talking to a guy who's built a platform which is basically, you build a platform where people can get all the things they want, like how much have I been paid, how do I book my holidays, how do I find out what this policy is on this, but then build the comms alongside that. So you've already got somewhere people are visiting on a regular basis, and then incorporate the comms into that. I think that's a really good approach. Any thoughts from you, Richard? Any advice for Crystal?
I would underline exactly what you've just said. Use what is already working. In our head, our process is, what's the outcome? What do we want people to do differently? How do we want people to feel that would be more likely for them to do that? And then we get into the content and the approach and the kind of methodology of it. That's kind of our approach to it. But that would quite rarely be go out and invest in a new bit of software or whatever. It's actually what's the right methodology for the state and the outcome that we want. Use what works.
Be agnostic, I think, you know, but you go find, you know, I think if you can become, you know, anti this or pro this, and I think, you know, just talk to people and find out what they want. Any more questions or comments, Ethan, for us to have a look at? Here we go. How do we keep on track with meaningful comms in such as ever changing reactive environment? Okay, so how do we keep on track with the meaningful comms in such as?
So I think again, sometimes I get accused of oversimplifying, right? But I think it's because I'm not very academic. Again, I'm not really very bright, so I like simple things. For me, there's a starting point when it comes to comms, learning, that this kind of things, which has to be, what are the business goals and what are the business measures already? So if we want to track the impact of a comms project, then the impact has to be a business impact. So we have our measures there already. The ultimate impact has to be, has it worked to the business? And sometimes, and I'll maybe speak more for my field than the comms field, but certainly as, you know, in learning and development as trainers and in HRD, we're guilty of designing an overcomplicated extra set of measures rather than just going, well, if this is all designed to impact on this, let's make this the measure. And to go back to a point you made earlier, Craig, the more we can have those kind of conversations with our internal customers, where they come and say, we want to do this internal comms campaign, and we go, right, what are the outcomes? What is it going to actually have an impact on? And the more we point to the fact that that's what we're going to measure, then it also helps us to build our credibility. Because sometimes people go, oh God, we haven't got a measure for that. And the fact that you're making them think like that can improve it. So, and you know, ever-changing reactive environments is 80% of our clients. There aren't very many for us that aren't really fast-paced, really fast-growing. And sometimes part of the conversations we're having with people is, how do you simplify your measures, but also make them really relevant and robust? And then whatever activities we're doing, we map back to that. It's really, really important.
The only thing I would add to that as well is, I think that sometimes particularly with modern communication tools and digital tools, there's a temptation to fall into the trap of, you know, likes and shares means understanding and engagement and mindset change as well. So it's not easy, and I back up what you just said there, Richard. But I think it's rather than looking at, I think it's like Kirkpatrick's, learning. It's all the different ways that you measure the impact of learning, isn't it? You've got the superficial or the lower level, which is kind of, people have read it, they've kind of shared it, they may have clicked on like, but that's kind of quite an easy thing to do without actually understanding it. It's then how do you then kind of get into the more elevated levels of understanding, and has that made a difference? And the only way you can really do that is by talking to people and observing and engaging your leadership team in those sorts of conversations. But that's easy for us to say. I appreciate it for whoever's asked this question or made this point. In a kind of situation where everything's like shifting sand, that can be more challenging. Conscious of time, Ethan, one more question if we have any more before we wrap up. How do we use digital signage for internal communication? So I'm not.
I've got another controversial view.
I think there's an
controversial, but
interpretation point here. Digital signage. I'm thinking plasma screens in lobbies, but also I think there might be a more subtle side to this as well. So you go fire off with your comment, Richard.
Yeah, and really, I'm probably going to repeat the message, but the short answer is be really outcomes focused. Be really outcomes focused with it. So I like to say I'm from big part of my kind of in-house career was in contact centers, and I worked in a really good one and a couple of really lousy ones. And if you think in most contact centers, there'll be wall boards of some sort with things like call handling time, adherence, all the things that we think are important. But I had a really interesting lesson. I coached a lady called Sophie Patricios, who's one of my leadership heroes.
I know Sophie. Yeah, I know Sophie. Yeah.
Small world. She was the VP of Lego, and she's amazing. And we walked around the contact center. She part of her job was in charge of the contact center at Lego, and there were no wall boards. And now it was the first time I'd ever seen it. And we started talking about it and noticed, and back in those days, you used to have these kind of turrets that were like kind of telephone keypads, but without the phone bit on. And there was Tipex on all of them. And I said, what? Tipex or Post-its. And I said, what's all that about? She said, no, underneath there's a light that flashes when there are a queue of calls in this particular agent's call queue that they handle, because they routed calls by language because it was a multilingual call center. And it flashed. If there's too many calls in the call queue, this red light flashes, and I don't want them to see it. And up to that point, I'd always been in contact centers where if there was two big call queues, the lights would flash. And I said, why wouldn't you want them to know that? And she said, my job's to manage the queues. Their job's to love the one they're with.
Right. That's brilliant.
And I was like, oh my God. And I've shared this with a client I was working with across last year, and they changed, and they were working in 111, which, if you can imagine how battered 111 call centers have been over the last years. And they realized that the reason that there's too many calls is because there's COVID and not enough staff.
Yeah.
Going, woo, woo, woo. There's too many. Ain't going to make the call handle. They ain't going to make the calls any better. So for me, but why? So why always flash it up? Well, it's because it's what we've always done. So again, I think if you've got the kind of luxury of, beautiful tech, which, potentially is very just in time, just be thinking about what is it that we actually want people to do differently as a result of whatever we stick on there.
Yeah.
And do that. And if it's different from how things have always been, brilliant. Back again, I don't know if it's still there because I haven't worked with them for a long time, but back in the day when Tesco Bank opened their new office in Newcastle, when you walked through the kind of turnstiles to go in, it wasn't digital signage, but they had this huge floor to ceiling whiteboard. And it was used all of the time.
Yeah.
It was updated with everything from the latest results, business results, through to whose birthday it was. And if anybody had said to us, should we make a big whiteboard part of internal comms strategy or a culture strategy, I would have gone, I don't think so. But it really worked. So think about outcomes, use it to get what you want, not just to share info, because that's what always happens in your kind of business.
Yeah. Fantastic. That's brilliant. Richard, Ethan, if you could just put the link up for the pulse check and just while we wrap up. So thank you very much, Richard. I think we've got other questions as well, which we just lesson for me, learning point when we do these. Factor more time in for questions. So apologies to those of you who asked any questions, made any comments. Richard, could I ask you? I'm not going to be able to do it today because I've got to travel straight after this, but I will do it over the weekend or on Monday. If you could maybe just have a look at the stream, the comments on the link, particularly on LinkedIn, because it's where we've had a lot of comments, and maybe respond or just not to everything, but and I'll pitch in as well with my thoughts. It'd be great if we can answer the questions for people who've taken the time to maybe ask something we've just not had time to look at it. We've just put a link on there for our diagnostic. It's a free diagnostic. It links to some of the things that we were talking about earlier around vision, purpose, values, mission, all of those sorts of things. It's a free diagnostic that you can try. We'll leave that on the screen just for a few minutes while we wrap up. I just want to say, Richard, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed that. In fact, I've enjoyed it so much that we've overrun, which is not a good thing, but it's because I got completely carried away with the conversation. I hope our viewers, listeners, whoever, however people have been consuming this have found it useful, whether they're watching it live or whether they're going to watch it on demand later on. Any final, very short sort of comments from you before we close this out, Richard?
No, I guess, knowing the majority of the audience is internal comms people, I just, there's a phrase that kind of I hear a lot up here in the Northeast, which is keep a had. It means just like if you've got some principles on this stuff, keep a hold of them and be that expert that consults with and guides and coaches your internal customers through. And as soon as they start seeing those better results from them, then there's no doubt that they'll come back to you more and more and more. Don't just, wherever you can, don't just keep on doing stuff that isn't going to work.
I think that's a really good way to finish everything off. So thank you again, Richard. We're going to be running another live stream where we'll be announcing that. We'll invite everyone across. So if you're not already following our Big Picture Big Picture People Facebook, LinkedIn page, do so. If you're not linked to me, connected to me, drop me a connection request. We'll be letting you know when the next live stream, and we're going to bring you more fantastic guests, and maybe we'll even get Richard back on as well, because we've had a really good conversation today. So thank you very much, Richard. Thank you to everyone who's taken part, and have a fantastic weekend and stay safe and look after yourself. Thank you very much.